So, just as an afternote, so really attracted to the idea of if there's simplistic and mutually beneficial, although not necessarily simplistic in the case of, just the wonder of leaves on trees. How amazing, it took millennia. And where there's attunement, there's a coalescence of intellect, some of which is not necessarily cognitive, but nonetheless articulate. So in a moment we can see things, and it's not visual, but we can see within the dimensionality that composes things like cell structure. So if I know myself, then I know how it all works. Very interesting. And so this is an internal physiology. And there's been significant difficulty with extraction. Then I know how it all works. So extraction. If it's at the forefront of a possible beneficial isolation for the sake of usury, then it disappears, Special abilities. So whether they exist or not, or there's intellectual property issues, intellectual property is kind of ridiculous, especially when the source of such kind of teachings are intrinsically sacred. And so people would talk about sacred, so there's in the moment, we refer to sacred, and power structure responds with a deferent conformity. That doesn't exist. I'm in control. So, and you can smell it intuitively, really. So, neutrality is always a nice space to enter into with respect to some of the references to control structure. It's beneficial to have some intrinsically neutral, so distension or detente. But also wanted to mention that we don't own the best things automatically, the best. So then it becomes silicon polystructure. All right. It was a Tibetan monk, but now it's a silicon polystructure, and it does whatever I want. It's just ridiculous. There's a bifurcation of descriptive intention, descriptions of intentionality, where some of this is for the betterment of humanity, when in most cases it's used to instigate an economically viable negative context. And so I don't know if that's an export value or not. In some cases, I know it is. Regulation, right? If something is extremely negative, and so perceptions of typical control are completely out of control, then for the betterment of the larger society, we regulate technology. If you break your toys, and then it's just ridiculous. And not only that, My goodness. So, what else is there? Okay, so originally the description that I intended was of a micromolecular substance that can be translated from different points in space. So it's almost a description would be like remembering myself somewhere else before I left. And so there was some, they were experimenting with photons. This is kind of above board science, but nanotechnological particles that can materialize anywhere and recognize abiotic discreteness and abruptly stop all the atomic rotation. So instantaneous. So it's so quite astonishing. The other thing it does is it wipes the adjacent memory. So no one in proximity would realize that there's a person missing. So new stuff to think about all the time. I think there should be much more consideration in the case of nature, what's sacred and what isn't. And thus far, so culture that generates a physiology, a neurophysiology. There's a reflexive perspective in the West towards culture in control structure. So if we refuse Jesus, Buddha, God, and nature, the universe, and most of the planet, why wouldn't it refuse us? And so there's a very potent manifestation of physiology that suggests we don't exist, or whoever. The destructive individuation, or what it is. And then in turn, this becomes polycrystalline, an isolated, it's not a contextual physiology, it's just an isolated physiology that can functionalize something that doesn't exist. Very interesting. All right. I hope you're doing well on this wonderful Monday afternoon. Up early this morning, 8 a.m., and got straight to work. All right. Social safeguards, I'm sure. All right. What else? Yeah. If someone is enraptured by concentration of negative historical miasma as the penultimate functionality, I don't think they're going to control nature, especially that kind of extraction and replication. So, constitutional domain, perhaps. All right, bye-bye.